So, obviously, there's been an enormous increase in globalization over the last decades. Uh, and in an important sense, this has been of great benefit to the world. It's improved GDP per capita in uh, in most countries, and in some cases very dramatically. Uh, but of course, these days there's a considerable pushback against globalization, uh, and some of this pushback seems to be tied to growing inequality. Now, Ralph mentioned that there's really only a weak correlation between trade and inequality, and that's true. But there's a considerably stronger correlation between changes in inequality and changes in openness, and I think that this is where some of the unease with globalization arises. Uh, the fact that the gains from globalization have not been distributed equally. And the question is why have they not been distributed equally? Well, the fact that inequality may have risen as a result of globalization in rich countries uh, can be explained by pretty conventional uh, economic reasoning, comparative advantage reasoning, which I will come back to a bit later on. But I think that the uh, rise in inequality in emerging economies has been a bit more of a puzzle because it does not fit the standard comparative advantage story. Uh, let me let me let me say why it does not, and to do that, let's use the Heckscher-Ohlin version of the theory of comparative advantage, which attributes differences in countries uh, as far as trade goes to differences in factors of production. So let's imagine, to make matters as simple as possible, that there are just two factors, that there's high skill labor and there's low skill labor. And let's do a thought experiment in which there are two countries. There's a rich country, there's an emerging economy. The rich country is rich precisely because it has a higher ratio of high skill to low skill workers. Um, and that means, according to comparative advantage, that the rich country has a comparative advantage in producing goods that require a high proportion of high skill workers. So an example would be software, computer software. The emerging economy has a comparative advantage in producing goods where skill doesn't matter, high skill doesn't matter so much, uh, let's say rice. So to understand the effect of globalization on production, let's look at production patterns before globalization, the no trade or autarky state, and then we'll compare those patterns with production after globalization. Uh, and let's start with a world where there's no trade. Uh, in that case, uh, producers uh, in the rich country, companies in the rich country will need to produce both software and rice because both software and rice are demanded by consumers in that country, and the same thing with the emerging economy. The emerging economy will produce both software and rice. But but there's a sense in which producing software in the emerging economy is inefficient. The labor force is better suited to producing rice, and in fact, you can think of low-skill workers in the emerging economy as actually being hurt by software production because they're not much needed for software production. So to the extent that uh, production is being diverted away from rice to software, that's actually going to reduce the demand for low-skill labor. And it's going to correspondingly uh, put downward pressure on low-skill wages. Just the opposite is true for the high-skill workers in the emerging economy. They benefit from the software production and see high wages. So now let's imagine that we open the door to trade between the rich country and the emerging economy. Uh, well, will now have more specialization in production. The rich country will shift production from rice to software, and they will import the rice from the emerging economy. Um, the emerging economy will do just the opposite. It will shift production from software to rice, and it will import the software from the rich country. What effect um, is this going to have on workers? Well, since the emerging economy is now producing more rice and less software than before, this is going to raise the demand for low-skill workers because rice uses low-skill workers more intensively than does software. So, uh, and just the opposite will happen for the high-skill workers. So low-skill wages will rise, high-skill wages will fall. In other words, inequality will be reduced by uh, by international by international trade. Uh, for those of you who remember your trade classes, this is sometimes called the Salper-Samuelson theorem. Uh, so inequality is reduced, and actually the theory of comparative advantage has done remarkably well historically in predicting how trade affects inequality. Remember, this is not the first global period of globalization the world has faced. There have been a number of others. There was an important globalization in the second half of the 19th century. At that point, Europe had a relative abundance of low-skilled labor. The US had a relative abundance of high-skilled labor. And as trade between US and Europe increased quite dramatically due to falling transport costs, we saw a fall in inequality in Europe, just as the theory of comparative advantage predicted. But the theory's been less successful for the recent globalization, and the question is why has it been less successful? It does predict an increase in inequality in rich countries. The high-skilled workers benefit more than the low-skilled workers, according to the theory, but the prediction is exactly opposite of what we've seen in emerging economies. So this puzzle appealed to Michael Kremer and me, um, and we tried to think, well, what's different about the current globalization by comparison with its predecessors? And we think this may have something to do with the fact that the current globalization has globalized the production process itself. To see what I mean, just think of something like computers. Computers are not. If you look at a computer, it's not the product of one country's production process. It might be designed in the US, it might be programmed in Europe, it might be assembled in China. So the production process itself has been globalized, and this changes the implications for inequality. So let me briefly sketch this alternative theory that Michael and I have tried to develop. As I say, it puts the emphasis on production when it comes to globalization, and we actually require that there be many skill levels, not just two. For the purposes of the discussion today, I'm going to assume that there are four levels, but you should think of there being uh, many more than that. Uh, I want to do the same sort of thought experiment that I was talking about uh, for comparative advantage. That is, uh, there will be one rich country, one emerging economy. And the rich country, once again, is rich because it has workers of higher skills. Now the skill levels will be A, B, and C, and D. Uh, so the rich country is going to have skills A and B. The emerging economy is going to have skills C and D, where A is bigger than B, is bigger than C, is bigger than D. And in this model, which is a model of production, wages are going to depend on how workers of different skill levels are matched together to produce output. So in the simplest version of the model, there are just two tasks to be performed. There's a managerial task, which is sensitive to skill, and there's a subordinate task, which is less sensitive to skill. And output, there's only one good in this model, so it's really quite simplistic. Uh, Output is produced by matching uh, people to the managerial position and to the subordinate position. And the amount of outputs will depend on the skill levels of the people occupying or performing those tasks. So here's a, an, a production function you can keep in mind. Let's say that output is equal to the square of the manager's skill times the skill of the subordinate. The fact that there's an exponent 2 here is not itself significant. What is significant is that uh, M has a higher exponent than S. In other words, the managerial task is more sensitive to skill than the subordinate task. So, for example, if the manager's skill were 4, the subordinate skill were 3, we would get output 4 squared times 3, or 48. And in this model, it's a competitive model, so all the matching will be efficient in the sense that uh, uh, workers of different skills will be matched together in the way that produces the most output in equilibrium. Now, there are, roughly speaking, two kinds of matching um, that might emerge in equilibrium. There's what we call cross-matching, where the manager and the subordinate have very different skills. And the idea here is that you want the much higher skilled people in the managerial role than in the subordinate position because output is more sensitive to managerial skill. But you don't want skill levels to be too different because uh, if you have a very high skilled manager, that skill is wasted if she's paired with a subordinate of much lower skill. So there are forces pulling in both directions, having skills which are similar within the same firm and having skills which are quite different. And in equilibrium, those two forces will be equilibrated. Uh, so the particular matching pattern we will see will depend on the available labor supply. And this brings me to globalization. Let's apply this model to our two countries. And once again, let's look at pre-globalization or autarky, if you compared with post-globalization. This is for a wide range of parameter values, this is the sort of equilibrium we expect before globalization. Now, in this case, what does globalization mean? It means that uh, all matching must occur a within a single country. That we don't have international production. All production is domestic. So in this case, we will see some matching in the rich country. We will see some matching in the poor country. By assumption, we don't have matching across countries. We don't have international production. But once the door to international production is opened, then we get a very different pattern, and we see that the relatively higher skilled people in the emerging economy are now paired with workers in the rich country. It in this setup, they're paired with the B workers, but they could well be paired with the A workers. The point is that uh, these D workers, who are very low skill workers, do not have these international matching opportunities because their skill levels are just too low to be uh, effectively matched with in the global labor market. They are left out. And this is our main point, that globalization leaves D workers behind because they don't have the new opportunities that globalized production uh, presents once the doors to international production are opened. So the C workers' wages go up, the D workers' wages either stay the same or possibly even go down, and inequality increases in the emerging economy. Now, what is the policy implication? Well, the clear policy implication uh, of this simple model is that in order to fight inequality, you need to enhance the skills of the D workers so that they also have global matching opportunities. Uh, you want to give them job training, you want to give them education. The problem is how to accomplish this because such training and education are costly. The workers themselves are not going to be able to afford to do this. So we can't rely on them to finance their own training, but neither can we rely on the private market to do this uh, fully. If I'm a low-skill worker and you're a company that is considering uh, hiring me and training me, well, you could make that investment in me. But the problem is that once you've done it, uh, I don't have to work for you. I can go to work for your competitor, and then your investment in my training has been lost. So we would expect that the private market is not going to solve the inequality problem on its own, and that leaves a role for investment in skill training and uh, and the like to third parties. The most obvious third party is government. So government might uh, either provide training and education directly or indirectly by subsidizing such training uh, by companies hiring low-skill workers. So if this if this approach is right, that the right course of action is not to stop globalization, uh, not to throw up our hands and say globalization uh, causes inequality, so we have to end it, but rather to uh, allow a greater segment of the workforce to share in the benefits of globalization by investing in their training. And I will stop there. Thank you.